It doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a smile. You're at dinner. Someone across the table, maybe a friend, maybe your brother-in-law, makes a joke at your expense. It's cloaked in charm, delivered with a grin, designed to draw laughter. And it works. Everyone chuckles. Even you. Especially you. But deep inside, something stings. The kind of sting you've felt before. The kind you've always told yourself to ignore. So, you reach for your fork, stir the food on your plate, and pretend it didn't happen. It's easier that way. Or so you've told yourself. For decades. But what if that moment isn't small? What if it's a warning? Carl Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And one of the most elegant ways we avoid our own soul is through the act of being nice. Not kind, nice. There's a difference. Kindness is strength with softness. Niceness is performance under pressure. It's a mask, a defense, a persona. Jung described the persona as the social face we wear to function in society. It's not fake, it's protective. Necessary, even. But over time, if we never take it off, the mask fuses to our skin, and when it does, we forget there was ever a real face beneath it. I once met a man named Harold. He was a retired dentist, 68 years old. Polished, pleasant, always knew the right thing to say. He was beloved by neighbors, admired by former patients, and endlessly praised by his church community. But one day, sitting on a bench outside the clinic he no longer worked in, he looked at me and said, "I'm exhausted from being liked." He wasn't being dramatic. His voice cracked. He stared out toward the parking lot like he was waiting for someone who had never arrived. Then he said something that hit harder than anything I'd heard all year. "I don't even know what I want anymore." That's the cost of nice. Harold had spent so much of his life keeping the peace, smoothing the tension, making everyone else comfortable, that he never asked himself who he really was beneath all that comfort. The joke at dinner, he'd heard it 1,000 times. The friendly teasing, the subtle disregard. The way his needs, his dreams, his opinions were always just a little too much. So he made them smaller, nicer, acceptable. But that's the trick of the persona. It doesn't just protect you from rejection, it also protects everyone else from your truth. And when truth is hidden long enough, it starts to rot. Here's the dramatic irony. The world often rewards the agreeable, the one who never complains, who always bends. They get called a good sport, easy to work with, so selfless. But inside, something is dying, not all at once, quietly, like a house with a leak behind the walls. You don't see the damage until the ceiling collapses. Jung's work reminds us that midlife is when the cracks begin to show. After 55, many people report feeling restless, hollow, uncertain. Not because life is bad, but because the script they've followed no longer fits. It's like wearing shoes you outgrew 20 years ago. You can still walk, but it hurts. This is where the journey of individuation begins, the process of reclaiming the pieces of yourself you gave away to fit in, to survive, to be liked. There's a reason why some people who smile the most seem quietly sad. Look into their eyes and you'll see it, the ache of never having said what they really wanted to say, the grief of a life lived on mute. Jung believed that these moments of internal tension are sacred, because when the persona fails, the soul finally speaks, but it takes courage. It means letting people see you unmasked. It means risking disapproval. It means finally admitting, "I didn't find that funny," or "that actually hurt," or even, "I don't want to be this person anymore." And yes, it might upset people. But ask yourself this: who are you protecting? Them, or the false self you've been clinging to? The mask of agreeability may have helped you get through life, but it cannot help you become who you're meant to be. That journey requires honesty, depth, a willingness to face the discomfort instead of deflecting it. So the next time someone makes a joke that stings, don't laugh just to keep the peace. Listen to the sting. It may be your soul asking you to wake up. Comment if you've ever noticed someone who smiles too much but seems quietly hollow. You must stop being agreeable to everyone else and start being honest with yourself. They never asked you if you wanted the role. They just handed you the script. And you? You played it so well they thought it was you. And without ever stepping onto a stage, you learned your lines. Don't complain, be useful, stay agreeable, suppress desire. You performed it so long that you forgot it was a performance. But now, past 55, the spotlight fades, and you realize you're still in costume, but the play is over. Carl Jung taught that the first half of life is focused on ego, on building up a sense of identity through roles, accomplishments, and expectations. But the second half, that's about the soul. It's about individuation, the unraveling of the false self to uncover the true. It's the moment when you stop asking, "What do they need from me?" and start whispering, "What do I need from myself?" I once met a woman named Grace. She was 62, never married, never traveled, never complained. For years, she was known as the responsible daughter. After her father died young, her mother leaned heavily on her. Her siblings scattered. Careers, children, distractions, but Grace stayed. She kept the house running, managed every birthday, every hospital bill, every call at 2 a.m. She smiled at every family gathering. Everyone praised her selflessness. But then, her mother passed. The house was empty, the routines dissolved. At the funeral, her brother gave a glowing eulogy. "We could always count on Grace," he said, tearing up. Grace didn't cry. She just stared at her own hands, then whispered, "Now what?" The question hit like thunder in a chapel. That moment, the hollow disorientation, was the rupture, the beginning of her awakening. Jung believed that roles we didn't consciously choose often become prisons. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Grace hadn't chosen to stay small. She had simply responded to the needs around her until those needs became her identity. But now, with no one left to serve, the echo inside grew louder. Who was she when she wasn't responsible? This is the quiet crisis many face after 55. It comes in the form of restlessness, a strange boredom, even resentment. You may feel ashamed for being tired of being the rock. You may dream of disappearing, of doing something completely uncharacteristic, like learning to dance, moving to a small town, or finally saying no. But those urges are not rebellion. They're resurrection. They're the soul finally cracking through the persona, the mask you've worn for decades just to be loved, respected, or needed. There's a dramatic irony in all of this. The very people who praise you for being so reliable, so patient, so composed, they may never truly know you, because they've only seen the role, not the actor. And as you age, the cost of the performance becomes too high. Your joints may ache, your mind may wander, your patience may thin, but it's not just age. It's the friction between the mask and the self. I remember another man, Thomas, a 59-year-old pastor who'd counseled hundreds through grief and crisis. Everyone called him a pillar of wisdom. But inside, he admitted, he hadn't felt joy in years. He confessed in a quiet moment, "I don't know if I believe anything I say anymore, but I'm too deep in to stop." He wasn't afraid of hell. He was afraid of becoming a stranger to the only version of himself others had come to depend on. He had built a temple of certainty, and now the wind of his own doubt echoed through it. That's the danger of living too long in a role. You mistake the structure for your soul. Jung didn't tell us to abandon responsibility. He urged us to awaken, to question the roles we inherited without consent, to see how they shaped our desires, our fears, our limits. Individuation begins when you recognize that what made you good in the eyes of others may be what's keeping you from being whole in your own. If you feel out of place lately, if the old identity no longer fits, if you find yourself asking, "Is this all there is?" Don't panic. That's not depression, that's transformation. It's the beginning of the unraveling, of shedding what was never yours to carry, of stepping off the stage you never asked to be on. If you feel restless, if your old identity no longer fits, don't panic. That's your soul knocking. Stop performing the version of you that made everyone else comfortable. There's a haunting kind of silence that follows you after 55, not outside, but inside. It's the silence that follows applause that never came. And yet, strangely, you still perform, still strive, still adjust yourself as if an audience is watching. But who are you performing for? The boss who once questioned your potential? The parent who never said, "I'm proud of you"? The teacher who said you'd never amount to anything? Most of these people are long gone, retired, relocated, or buried. But in your mind, their voices remain, judging every move. Carl Jung warned us about this phenomenon, calling it projection. He said, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." In other words, we think we're reacting to real criticism, but in truth, we're just hearing echoes of our own inner wounds. It's a dangerous illusion, a psychological theater where the audience is made of shadows, not people. And like shadows, these critics aren't real, but they feel real. You avoid starting a new business because your father would have scoffed. You hesitate to dance at a wedding because your ex once mocked your joy. You stay silent in a conversation because, years ago, someone important dismissed your thoughts. These memories form what Jung called complexes, emotional knots tied so tightly they bend your behavior without you even realizing. The tragedy is, the performance never ends, even when the audience has left the building. I remember meeting Robert, a 59-year-old man with sharp eyes and a gentle tone. He had recently launched a small online shop selling hand-painted birdhouses, a strange shift from his decades-long career in finance, but something he clearly loved. Yet when I asked why he hadn't told many people, his smile faltered. "My dad would have called it foolish," he admitted. I asked when his father had passed. 14 years ago, he whispered, almost ashamed. The pain wasn't fresh, but it was still alive, trapped like a child inside the adult body. That's the power of the projection. It freezes us at the emotional age when the wound was inflicted. Robert wasn't a grown man running a business. He was still a boy, hoping for approval from someone who was no longer there. This is the silent struggle of many people in midlife. From the outside, they seem stable, accomplished, but deep down, they're chasing ghosts, chasing praise that will never come, and worse, they're shaping their lives to avoid the same disapproval they feared decades ago. It's a kind of haunting, not by spirits, but by expectations. Invisible judges sit in the balcony of your mind, arms crossed, shaking their heads. And every time you hesitate, overthink, or suppress a desire, you're offering them a performance they didn't even ask to see. Jung believed the path to healing was through individuation, becoming your whole self by confronting and reclaiming these projections. But first, you must notice them. Ask yourself, who am I trying to impress? Whose approval do I fear losing? What part of me still believes I need permission to live freely? These questions open the door to freedom. Not the loud kind with fireworks and declarations, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind where you finally exhale and say, "I don't have to prove anything anymore." Here's the irony. Many of the people whose opinions we fear never actually judged us. Or if they did, they've long forgotten. The real problem is what we internalized. The voice that once came from someone else becomes our own, disguised as logic, caution, maturity. But it's not. It's fear, disguised, and it rules our decisions far more than we realize. Until one day, you catch it in the act. You pause before sending a message, before accepting an invitation, before saying what you really think, and you hear the whisper, "What would they think?" That's your signal. That's the mask speaking. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The voices of these invisible judges are not fate. They're echoes. They don't define you. They delay you. And once you recognize that, you begin to write a different script, one not written by childhood fear or external approval, but by something deeper. Truth. So, let me ask you again, who are you still performing for? The world isn't watching, and the ones you feared disappointing probably never thought about it the way you did. There's something bittersweet in that realization. A freedom, a loneliness, but also a chance to stop the performance and step into your real life. Stop living for the applause of ghosts. They say men don't cry, but what if that silence is the very thing that's keeping us broken? It's a belief many carry deep into their later years that strength means composure, control, stoicism, that to show grief or fear is to appear weak. Especially after 55, this belief becomes an invisible script many still follow, long after the curtain should have closed. Carl Jung warned us that the parts of ourselves we repress, the emotions we label as unmanly, shameful, or too much, do not vanish. They simply hide. And what hides festers. Jung called it the shadow, the side of the psyche we conceal even from ourselves. But the shadow doesn't stay silent. It leaks into our relationships, our choices, our regrets, and often our legacy. I once knew a man named Leonard, 71 years old, a retired Marine, the kind of man who still stood to attention when the national anthem played in a grocery store. His back was always straight, voice calm, shirt tucked. To the world, Leonard was discipline incarnate. But there was something tight in his eyes, not hardness, but something held. He never cried at his wife's funeral, not when his daughter moved abroad, not even when he underwent surgery for a heart condition. His sons admired him. His grandsons feared him a little. He called it being a man. But what no one knew was that Leonard hadn't truly felt safe crying since 1968, when he held a fellow soldier in his arms during a firefight in Da Nang. That night, he wept silently under a tarp, then swore to himself, never again. Never again would he let anyone see the boy inside the uniform. Then, one winter afternoon, Leonard was babysitting his youngest grandson, Daniel, a quiet 10-year-old who was fascinated by war history. Daniel asked, "Grandpa, were you ever scared in the war?" Leonard opened his mouth to give the usual answer, "No, you just do what you have to do." But the words never came. Instead, he felt something rise, uninvited. Not from his throat, but from somewhere deeper, a sound, a memory, an image. Suddenly, he was back in that jungle, back to the night he'd buried a photo of his own brother in the mud because he couldn't carry the weight anymore. And in front of Daniel, without warning, Leonard broke down. It wasn't loud, just a soft, heaving tremble as tears traced the deep lines on his face. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't even speak. He simply placed a small hand on his grandfather's shoulder and stayed there. That moment rewrote Leonard's life, and Daniel's, because for the first time, the patriarch wasn't a statue. He was human. Leonard later told me, "I thought crying made me weak." But that was the first time I felt strong without armor. What Jung would call integration had begun, the merging of shadow and self. The part of Leonard he had hidden, the grieving brother, the scared young man, the mourning husband, had finally stepped out of exile, and with it came a strange peace. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We often misunderstand this. We chase positivity, clarity, success, but real peace isn't found in light alone. It's found in the courage to face what we've buried. The real irony: the more we hide our weakness, the more control it has over us. Men who never express vulnerability often become angry without knowing why. Women who never voice sadness often become caretakers of everyone else's pain but their own. Over time, admiration replaces connection. You become respected, but not truly known. And that respect can feel like a cage. If you're over 55 and still holding in tears you never cried, fears you never voiced, or memories you never dared revisit, it's not too late. In fact, now is the perfect time. The second half of life, as Jung believed, is not for perfection, but for wholeness. And wholeness requires that we stop curating an image and start telling the truth. The people who love you don't need you to be unbreakable. They need you to be real. Because the parts of your story you think are too painful, too embarrassing, too messy, might be the exact parts that heal someone else. Don't rob them of that medicine, and don't rob yourself of the freedom that comes from stepping out of the armor. Stop being strong all the time. Your softness is your strength now. They never see it coming. The moment silence becomes unbearable. You retire, or the kids move out, or the business runs without you. And suddenly, time opens up like a canyon. At first, it feels like freedom. But give it a few weeks and something darker creeps in. The dread of stillness. That's when the calendar starts to fill again. You join committees, schedule lunches, offer to help neighbors. You keep moving, smiling, contributing. But it's not out of joy. It's defense against something rising from below, a voice you've buried under years of noise. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." After 55, busyness often becomes that absurdity, a socially acceptable mask that hides a quiet panic. Who am I without the grind? Ellis thought he was ready. At 60, he sold his consulting firm and told everyone he was looking forward to finally relaxing. But 3 weeks into retirement, he couldn't sleep. He'd wake up at 4 a.m., heart racing, inventing errands just to get out of the house. His wife found him repainting the garage floor with a toothbrush. "I just want to feel useful," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. He didn't look fulfilled. He looked hunted. So he joined a community council, then a mentorship group, then started a side business just to keep sharp. What no one knew, not even Ellis, was that he wasn't running toward purpose. He was running from silence. That silence, Jung would say, was where the unconscious was trying to speak. But the ego, that identity we build through titles, habits, and roles, fears that stillness. Because in stillness, the persona starts to crack. The polished identity you wore for decades, the provider, the achiever, the rock, can no longer survive without applause. And so, like Ellis, many keep performing long after the stage has gone dark. It's tragic, but common. Retirees who never rest, volunteers who burn out, grandparents who overextend, all because they fear that if they stop moving, the truth will catch up. Here's the twist. The truth they fear isn't a monster. It's their forgotten self, the parts of them they ignored while surviving life. The griefs never processed, the dreams quietly buried, the fears they never had time to face. Jung called this the shadow, the hidden part of ourselves we deny, yet carry everywhere. And busyness becomes the perfect tool to keep it buried. After all, who questions a full calendar? Who dares interrupt someone too busy to rest? But the soul does. Eventually, the body does too. Exhaustion, depression, unexplained anger, these aren't just getting older. They're protest signals from within. signals that something vital is being ignored. In Jungian psychology, the second half of life is meant to shift from ego to self, from what we present to what we are. That transformation cannot happen in noise. It demands stillness, reflection, room to remember what matters beyond performance. Ellis finally broke when he forgot a meeting for the first time in decades. He sat in the empty cafe, ashamed, staring at the untouched coffee he had ordered. He realized he didn't even want to be there. He was exhausted, not from activity, but from pretending to care. That night he went home and found an old sketchbook he hadn't touched since his 20s. The next morning, instead of rushing out, he opened it, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He felt present. "Why did I stop doing this?" he whispered. Because somewhere along the way, Ellis traded reflection for reputation. And now, he was beginning to reverse the trade. Have you ever done that? Have you ever chosen tasks over truth, not because you had to, but because you were afraid to stop? If so, you're not alone. This is the secret crisis of post-55 life that no one talks about. The fear that stillness might reveal a stranger in the mirror. But Jung would assure you that stranger is your true self, waiting. So sit with the silence. Let the noise fall away. Something sacred rises when you stop filling every hour. Stop running from the stillness. It's where the answers wait. It begins quietly, not with a scream, but with a scroll. You open your phone. A new app you've never heard of is suddenly the only thing anyone talks about. Your friend's daughter just went viral. Your co-worker's son is now a digital strategist at 25. And there you are, staring at your morning coffee, wondering if you're slowly being erased, not by malice, but by momentum. It's not jealousy. It's not even confusion. It's something deeper, a gnawing fear that you no longer belong to the time you're living in, that somehow the world is speeding up, and you're being quietly left behind. Carl Jung understood this feeling long before smartphones existed. He didn't call it irrelevance. He called it identity fragmentation. When our outer world changes faster than our inner world can keep up, the mask, the persona we've worn for decades begins to crack. And behind that mask is not just a face, but a forgotten self, waiting to be remembered. Jung believed that the first half of life is about building careers, families, reputations. But the second half, that's about shedding, about stepping away from the treadmill of visibility and into the forest of the soul. Let me tell you about Melvin. He was 58 when his company restructured him out of his position. For decades, he was a tech executive, sharp, reliable, always ahead of the curve. But the curve turned, and Melvin, despite his best efforts, didn't. In the weeks after his layoff, he spiraled. "I need to stay relevant," he told me. So he launched a podcast, a clumsy attempt to sound youthful. He enrolled in digital marketing courses, surrounded by kids half his age. He started posting articles on LinkedIn, trying to sound like a thought leader. But something was missing. Not in the content, in him. I remember the moment it shifted. We were sitting in his garage when he noticed an old box beneath a tarp. He pulled it out. Inside were blocks of cedar, chisels, a half-carved wooden bear. And here's the twist. Victor had never grieved the end of his career. He hadn't mourned the injury that forced his early retirement. He hadn't even looked at his old medals in 20 years. Instead, he turned that grief into mentorship, but not the healthy kind. It was projection. It was unspoken regret, wrapped in the disguise of devotion. This is the dark irony Jung points to. The more we refuse to face our own unhealed wounds, the more we try to heal others, not for their sake, but for our own unconscious redemption. And it's not just parents. I knew a woman named Teresa who micromanaged her best friend's divorce, not out of support, but because she had never addressed her own loveless marriage. I knew a teacher named Mark who pushed every student like they were Olympic hopefuls, because his own musical career had crumbled before it began. We do it all the time. We call it help, but often it's a mask. Jung believed that the only true healing comes through individuation, the slow, often painful process of becoming who you truly are. That journey begins when you stop projecting, when you stop meddling, when you sit in the silence of your own unmet desires and ask, what part of me have I handed to someone else to carry? This is not about blame. It's about awakening. You may still help others, but after 55, help must come from wholeness, not hunger. Have you ever felt your own mask slip under pressure? Caught yourself correcting someone, not because they were wrong, but because their path looked too much like yours once did? That impulse might be covering up something unhealed inside. And until you sit with it, you'll keep chasing healing in the wrong direction. So the next time you find yourself stepping in to guide, advise, or fix, pause. Not to abandon them, but to finally check in with you. Stop trying to fix everyone else. Your soul is waiting for you to listen.